My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I'm 31 years old, born and raised in Connecticut, the daughter of an old money family that believed in legacy, not headlines. My father passed 2 years ago, leaving behind a vast estate and something even more valuable, his trust in me. I was always the quiet one, the one who listened more than spoke, who observed the small cracks in people's intentions before they even knew they were breaking. Maybe that's why I saw it so clearly in James. The charm that never blinked, the smile that lasted half a second too long, the compliments rehearsed to fit whatever script he thought I wanted. And for a while, I let it happen. I nodded. I wore the ring. I let my name be printed on embossed invitations that said Hartwell and Kingsley in metallic serif font, because I needed him to believe it, because I needed everyone to believe it, right until the moment they didn't. James thought this wedding was his, a coronation almost. He treated every detail like a campaign poster, every wine choice, every flower petal placement, every guest list adjustment was strategic. And yet, he never once asked me what I wanted, because what I wanted didn't matter to him, only what I represented, a name, a legacy, a financial future he couldn't achieve on his own. I found the prenup he drafted through his lawyer, buried with subtle clauses granting him access to future properties, shared control over liquid assets, and the most telling one, a stipulation for financial equalization in the event of a divorce, which, of course, he assumed I would never request. He believed I was so in love, so compliant, that I'd never read the fine print. And he was right. About the reading. I didn't read it. I rewrote it. The morning of the ceremony, the sun filtered through the chapel windows in perfect symmetry. My dress was clean ivory, minimalist, high-collared with no embellishments, not a single sparkle. I wore my hair pulled back, no veil. I didn't need one. The mask had already served its purpose. The guests filled the pews with polite murmurs, the kind that bubble with anticipation but say nothing real. James stood at the altar with the posture of a man who believed he had already won. I walked toward him with a document tucked beneath the bouquet, folded, notarized, sealed. Not the marriage license. Something far more permanent. When the officiant reached the part where he asked if there were any final declarations before the vows, I turned to James and gently handed him the document. "You'll want to see this," I said calmly, without a tremor in my voice. He blinked, half smiled, assuming it was a love letter, a sentimental note to melt the room. But the seal had my family crest on it. That's when his fingers tensed. The paper, once opened, revealed not vows, but a legal addendum, the revocation of his beneficiary status from my father's estate. My signature was already there, witnessed, filed, irrevocable. The clause that changed everything was in bold. Effective immediately, the undersigned shall not benefit directly or indirectly from any financial asset, trust, or estate property linked to the Hartwell family lineage, including but not limited to future inheritance, real estate, or business holdings. This supersedes all verbal or written agreements made prior. He didn't speak. The room didn't breathe. I turned to the officiant and whispered, "There will be no wedding today." Then I placed the bouquet on the altar, turned around and walked out. No screaming, no tears, just footsteps echoing against marble floors that once hosted our rehearsals. Outside, the wind lifted the hem of my dress ever so slightly, like even nature was pulling me forward. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in silence, and now it was complete. By the next morning, the video had been uploaded. Not by me, but someone always captures the unexpected. It went viral within hours. The caption was simple, poetic, and anonymous. She never raised her voice, only her veil. I disappeared from town the same day, not because I was hiding, but because I was done. With all of it. My new name was already in process. My father used to say the most powerful women are the ones who don't need to explain. I think now I understand what he meant. I wasn't running. I was rewriting the story. Without him. Without them. Just me. The silence. And a document that ended a performance before the curtain ever rose. When I left that chapel, I didn't take anything with me except the knowledge that I had cut the string before the puppet show began. James could keep the applause he never earned. What he didn't know was that the stage itself had already been dismantled long before the wedding date. I had been preparing not just an exit, but a series of closures. Silent, strategic, irreversible. Because when a man tries to marry a legacy, thinking it comes with a deed and a key, he forgets the foundation it was built on. And this time, the foundation belonged to me, and I had already gifted the house to someone else. The property in question was a stately colonial estate tucked in Fairfield County. 2 stories, wraparound porch, black shutters, and a history older than James's understanding of commitment. He used to call it the retirement plan. He said it with that smirk he thought was charming, rubbing his hands along the mahogany banister like it was already his. That house had been in my mother's side of the family, but when she passed and left it to me, it became more than just real estate. It became a test. Would I let it become his showroom of conquest, or would I make it something that would echo louder than his ambition? 3 weeks before the wedding, while he was out meeting with a supposed architect, a friend he claimed would help renovate the master suite, I was sitting in a boardroom with 3 women who knew exactly why they were there. 1, a notary, 1, a lawyer, and the third, a woman named Dr. Marla Rowe, founder of an organization that provided housing and legal resources for women escaping financial abuse and coercive relationships. I had found her name in a small newspaper article from Vermont. I read her quote once and never forgot it. Sometimes the safest place is a place someone else wanted to steal. I transferred the deed of the estate to her foundation, not as a donation in my name, but in the name of the Hartwell legacy, with a clause that ensured the property could never be sold for private profit, only repurposed as a long-term refuge, the kind of place that had real walls and symbolic protection. I didn't want my house to become James's victory lap. I wanted it to become a door other women could walk through when their lives collapsed quietly in the dark. And with the right legal phrasing, I made sure no man like him could ever touch it again. On paper, it was simple. A few signatures, a notarized stamp, and a line that read, "This property shall be maintained as a sanctuary for recovery and dignity. No commercial sale, transfer of title, or profit-driven development shall be permitted under penalty of forfeiture." But the real satisfaction wasn't the paperwork. It was knowing that the very house he planned to list for sale was now a place where his name couldn't even be spoken without violating the code of safety it was meant to protect. James didn't find out until 5 days after the wedding that never happened. He had driven to the estate, keys jangling in his hand like he was entering a showroom. According to the security cameras, which had already been updated, he walked around the perimeter, tried every lock, then made a phone call. To me. I didn't answer. Then, he called my lawyer, who told him politely but firmly that any further inquiries should be directed to the new property manager of the Hartwell Rowe Foundation. Her name, Marla. The same woman who now had the power to grant or deny any visitor access to the grounds. And James was not on the list. In his desperation, he tried to schedule a meeting, said he wanted to understand the transition and explore a cooperative solution. He even offered to help with renovations. Marla declined, then sent a follow-up email, which she forwarded to me, that read, "You may want to consider what it means when the house you thought you owned becomes a mirror. What you see in it is not your reflection. It's your removal." The footage of him being turned away was never released. I wasn't interested in public humiliation. That would come later, and more strategically. This part wasn't about revenge. It was about redirection. Taking something he saw as his next conquest and turning it into a fortress for those like me, and unlike me, who needed to believe that silence could still build something strong. The estate now hosts weekly workshops, financial literacy for women, legal clinics, trauma counseling. The library still has my family's crest etched into the fireplace mantel, but now it holds donated books about resilience, survival, and personal agency. James wanted to put a wine cellar under that house. Instead, it has a counseling room lined with quotes from women who refused to be bought. That was the second move. There would be more. Each one calculated, each one layered. Because this wasn't about rage. It was about reclaiming every space he thought he could stand in, and making sure that, one by one, each door he tried to open would lead him right back into the emptiness he came from. James always believed he was 2 steps ahead, not just of me, but of everyone. He prided himself on being the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be in control. His power came from charm, manipulation, and a dangerous understanding of how easily people give away their trust when the suit is well-fitted and the lies are softly spoken. What he never counted on was that I had grown up in a home where men like him weren't myths. They were cautionary tales. My father taught me early that a vault wasn't just for valuables. Sometimes it was for truths you needed to protect, not from theft, but from denial. That was why I knew exactly what to do when I started to find cracks in James's polished exterior. I didn't scream. I didn't leave. I opened a new vault, and I started filling it with everything he thought he'd hidden. It began with one email, a forwarded invoice from a mutual friend that didn't make sense, a private charter to Aspen that I never knew he took. When I asked, James brushed it off, saying it was a business trip with clients he couldn't disclose. But something about the signature on the receipt, a slight slant, a name misspelled, told me he wasn't just hiding a trip. He was testing how little he needed to lie for me to believe him. So I pretended to believe. That's when I started collecting. I bought a burner phone, opened a cloud account under a pseudonym, backed up every message he sent me, installed a silent tracking app on the laptop I gifted him for his birthday. I knew it wouldn't take long, and it didn't. Within weeks, I had screenshots of private messages to women in 3 different cities, voice notes where he coached someone on how to approach an old client of mine, someone whose family controlled oil rights in Nevada, a draft contract unsigned but clear in its intent, promising access to assets soon to be liquidated upon inheritance. The language wasn't just cold, it was criminal. My father had an old safe buried behind a false wall in the study. James thought it was ornamental. I told him the lock was broken. It wasn't. Inside, I started storing printed copies of everything, labeled folders, dated transcripts, photos, his aliases. One of them, Harvey L., was used to open an offshore account in Belize. I knew because I followed the breadcrumbs in a trail of sloppy metadata he forgot to scrub from a PDF attachment. Every new discovery wasn't just a confirmation of who he really was. It was a layer in the architecture of the collapse I was building around him. I kept everything quiet until after the wedding, or what he thought would be one. He never asked me why I was calm, why I didn't fight back. He took it as surrender, and I let him. But the moment I walked out of that chapel, I made one phone call to a friend in forensic accounting. Within 48 hours, every document in that vault had been digitized, watermarked, and time-stamped. A copy was sent to the Office of the Inspector General, another to the SEC, a third to the managing partner at the consulting firm that had hired him after he retired early from his last post, the one he said ended on good terms. Spoiler, it didn't. James showed up at the estate 2 days later, demanding access. He said he left his personal items behind. I told the property manager not to let him near the office. He tried to bluff, said he had legal rights to shared property. I reminded him that the estate no longer belonged to me, and that trespassing would trigger legal consequences, a line he understood only when he saw the sheriff's cruiser waiting outside the gate. He never saw the safe, but word got around, quietly, discreetly. His name was flagged in internal reviews. 3 contracts fell through. His mentor at the firm suddenly stopped returning his calls. The assistant he used to mock behind her back posted a vague but pointed thread on LinkedIn that gained traction. I didn't have to ruin him publicly. The documents did that on their own. All I did was preserve them and make sure they were delivered at the right moment, to the right inboxes, in the right order, like setting off a chain of dominoes, one slow, deliberate tip at a time. James always thought the vault was where wealth went to sleep. For me, it was where the truth woke up, and it kept growing, heavier, more undeniable, until even he couldn't pretend it wasn't real. I didn't need to make a scene. I just needed to open the door he thought would stay locked forever. Because when a man builds his empire on lies, all it takes is one safe filled with the truth to burn it all down. James had a way of treating objects like trophies, not for the memories they held, but for the reflections of himself they offered. His car was the clearest of all, a sleek, matte black convertible, imported from Europe, with custom leather seats and a license plate that read VC Try. He'd once told me it was his prize for surviving people who doubted him. He parked it like it was a monument, always at a slant, as if the car, and by extension, the man behind the wheel, deserved to be seen from a more flattering angle than the rest. But what he didn't realize was that while he'd been polishing the hood and smiling at his own reflection in the tinted glass, I had already changed the title of ownership, legally, irrevocably, and silently. The car had been purchased under my name, a gift, technically, from me to him, though funded by the trust I had access to from my father's estate. At the time, he made a show of being reluctant about accepting it, said he didn't like owing things to anyone, but his hands shook when he turned the key for the first time. He played the role of modest fiancé, but that vehicle became his second skin. He washed it every Sunday, talked about it like it breathed. Once, I caught him whispering to it, not sweet nothings, more like instructions. That's when I started to realize the car wasn't just a possession. It was part of a narrative he was building, one where he was already the heir, the successor, the untouchable. That made what I planned next all the more poetic. The day after I delivered the annulment papers, I called the auction house. Not just any auction house, the same one that had once denied James entry to a collector's gala years ago because he wasn't on the list. He never forgot the slight. That night, he raged in our kitchen for 2 hours, ranting about old money snobs and closed doors. I remembered every word, so I made sure this would be the same door he'd find locked again, only this time, from the outside of his own life. The paperwork was easy. I had the deed, the receipts, the registration. I listed the car for charity auction, all proceeds to go to a shelter for women escaping financial abuse, the kind of story James would have called overly emotional nonsense during our dinners with his former colleagues. The date was set, the guest list was curated, and yes, I made sure a live stream would be available to anyone who subscribed to the auctioneer's private YouTube channel, which, by pure coincidence, saw a sudden spike in viewership that week. James learned about the auction the way I wanted, from a friend who texted him a photo of his car on the event's glossy flyer. I imagined his face when he saw it. I imagined him pacing, dialing, demanding, but he couldn't reach me. And he couldn't reach the car either, because the keys, the garage access, even the GPS signal had already been reassigned. I'd prepared for every move he might make. And in this game, he didn't even know which board we were playing on. When the day came, the bidding started slow. Then it spiked. The final buyer was an older man in a tailored suit, not flashy, not loud, but purposeful. I recognized him immediately. Years ago, James had mocked him publicly at a gala for not understanding market trends, called him dead capital in a breathing room. That man raised his paddle with the same hand James once refused to shake. He paid in full, on the spot, then leaned into the microphone and said only one thing. Some things are worth more once they're free of parasites. The video went viral within hours. Not because of the car, but because of the reaction. James, caught on camera outside the venue, being held back by security, screaming that it was all a mistake, that it was his, that this was theft. Except it wasn't. It was transfer. And it was legal, ironclad, final. In the comments section, someone wrote, "When you build your life on someone else's generosity, don't be surprised when they repossess your throne." I didn't comment. I just watched him unravel in public, the way I had unraveled in private when I first realized what he was. The difference was, I restitched myself in silence. He tore himself apart trying to prove he'd never been vulnerable. The car was never about horsepower or prestige. It was a symbol. And symbols, when reclaimed, become statements. This one said, "I know what you did, and now, so does everyone else." I didn't need revenge with blood or shouting. I just needed a gavel, a signature, and a live stream. And in that moment, With one vehicle driven into the hands of someone who knew exactly what it meant to reclaim dignity, I felt lighter, not because I'd taken something from him, but because I'd taken something back. There was something especially cruel about the ring, not because it sparkled with the deceit of polished diamonds, nor because it had been presented to me in front of hundreds of guests with trembling hands and a rehearsed declaration of love, but because I now understood its purpose. It wasn't a promise. It was a bribe wrapped in sentiment, a beautiful cage to lock my name, my family, and my inheritance into his carefully calculated illusion. He had chosen the cut, the clarity, the design, all tailored to impress a social media algorithm and his own reflection in the mirror, and I had worn it, proudly, for months, parading what I thought was a symbol of commitment, only to realize later it was the opening act of a fraud. But if the ring had been part of his performance, I would give it a final role, one that would end the show and melt the curtain he'd built between his lies and the truth. After the auction, after the car had been taken from him in front of the very people whose approval he'd craved, I knew he was waiting for my next move. But he wouldn't guess what it was, because this one wouldn't scream. It would whisper. It would arrive in a small padded envelope, ordinary in appearance, but containing something irreversible, a message cast in metal, shaped in silence, and delivered with surgical precision. I took the ring to a local artisan, someone I trusted, a quiet woman in her 60s who understood that jewelry holds more than gold. It holds memory, betrayal, identity. When I handed her the ring, I didn't flinch. I just said, "Melt it." She asked nothing, just nodded. And days later, what returned to me was no longer a ring, but a key. Literally. A small, solid key made from the exact same metal that had once encircled my finger. And engraved on its side was a single sentence. "This opens only what's yours." Then I wrote the letter. Not long, just honest. Every word soaked in restraint, each phrase cold as the marble in his family's mausoleum, which he once bragged he'd have access to after the wedding. I reminded him that trust, like gold, can be forged or faked, but only the truth survives fire. I told him I hoped the key would help him find something he truly owned in life, since my name, my house, my father's legacy, and now even the ring, were no longer his to touch. The closing line read simply, "The only thing this metal opens now is the cell of your own greed." I mailed the package on a Wednesday morning. He received it Friday afternoon, just as he was walking into a meeting with federal agents regarding the financial discrepancies I had anonymously submitted weeks earlier. Yes, the same discrepancies that involved forged assets and inheritance manipulation, all tied to companies he'd tried to funnel through dummy corporations. I timed the delivery perfectly. I knew where he'd be, knew he couldn't ignore the package once it was placed in his hand with a smile from the receptionist, knew he'd open it there, in front of the men who now held folders stamped with words like fraud and embezzlement. The moment was caught on surveillance, not leaked, just shared with me by a source who owed me a favor. In the footage, he opens the box, reads the letter, turns the key over in his fingers once, twice, then looks up as if the room around him had collapsed. His mouth moves. No sound. The agents wait. One of them smiles. The rest, I'll never know, because I didn't need to. That silence was enough. The story of the ring began with applause, champagne, and photos under sunset light. It ended with cold steel, burned illusions, and a man holding the ashes of a life he never truly owned. I didn't need fire to destroy him, just heat, just transformation, just the quiet rebirth of something that once symbolized submission, now shaped into freedom. And me? I didn't keep a replica, didn't make a new ring. I didn't need a symbol anymore. I had something better. I had the knowledge that every time he looked at his hand and saw the absence, he would remember the weight of what he lost. Not because I screamed, but because I knew how to forge justice without ever raising my voice. There's a particular kind of revenge that doesn't arrive like a punch. It arrives like a mirror, one held up so precisely, so elegantly, that the person looking into it sees not just what they are, but what they pretended to be. That's what I planned for his honeymoon. Or rather, the space where a honeymoon once lived, now reborn as something much colder, much truer, and much more permanent. Because I wasn't just undoing a wedding. I was rewriting the very architecture of what he thought love and legacy were made of. And I would do it from the same coordinates where he intended to toast to my last name. He had booked it with confidence, long before I knew the truth. A 5-star resort in the Caymans, with oceanfront suites and private butlers. A place where, in his words, important people vacationed with important money. I found the confirmation email 2 weeks before the wedding, while cross-referencing his financial behavior. That's when I decided not to cancel it. No. I would keep the date, the location, even the reservation. Only I'd change the guest list, the purpose, and the outcome entirely. I contacted a network of women. Some I had known through silent conversations. Others I had read about in footnotes of forgotten court cases. Women who had stood at the edge of altars, inheritances, ordeals, only to realize they were being groomed for convenience, not chosen for love. I didn't just want revenge anymore. I wanted conversion, transformation. I wanted the space meant for my submission to become a platform for our voices. And so I founded it, the first annual summit of heirs who survived. The hotel didn't ask questions when I changed the event name in their system. After all, the booking was paid in full. I updated the catering to accommodate a keynote dinner. I reserved extra suites under a nonprofit banner I had quietly registered 3 days prior. The name of the nonprofit? Her name remains. And in its articles of incorporation, it listed its mission clearly: to provide resources, visibility, and legal tools for women navigating financial and emotional exploitation under the guise of romantic commitment. When he arrived at the resort, expecting champagne and silk sheets, he instead saw a lobby filled with women in tailored suits, media kits on glass tables, and signs with phrases like, "We wrote our own vows to ourselves," and "Inheritance is not a contract for silence." His name wasn't on any welcome packet. His suite had been reassigned. The concierge, following my explicit instructions, handed him a single item, a laminated schedule of the summit's sessions. At the bottom, it read, "Keynote speaker, Saturday, 8 p.m., Helena Granger." Topic: he wanted a last name. I gave him a title, Con Artist. Yes, I stood on that stage. Not in white, not in veils or floral crowns, but in steel gray satin and sharp heels. The room was full. Cameras recorded. I didn't speak of him by name. I didn't need to. I told our stories, the collective pattern of women chosen for lineage, not for love. I explained how financial intimacy is the final frontier of manipulation. And when I finished, I quoted the line from the document I handed to the judge on the day I didn't say, "I do." This agreement protects my name from theft and my voice from erasure. He didn't stay for the full weekend. He left after the first night, but not before trying to speak to the press, who had already received a press kit from my legal team, including excerpts of emails, photos of forged documents, and statements from 3 of his former employers. He would not recover from this. Not socially, not professionally, not legally. He came for a honeymoon. He found a tribunal. He expected a suite. He got a summit. And me? I slept better that weekend than I had in months. Not because I had won, but because I had created something he couldn't undo. A gathering, a precedent, a movement carved into the calendar where our wedding was supposed to be. I had stood where he wanted me silent, and I had spoken. Not to him, to us, to the ones who wear veils of silence even now. The next morning, I walked to the beach alone, held a piece of paper in my hand, my former wedding itinerary, and let the wind take it. The ocean didn't care. The sun didn't rise any differently. But I did. And this time, with no one else's name stitched into my spine. There's a dangerous arrogance in the way some men use delete buttons. They believe that erasing a line of text is the same as undoing a thought, that if a message vanishes from a screen, the intent behind it is nullified too, as if memory is less permanent than data. But I had learned long ago that what people delete says more than what they send, especially when they think no one is watching. And he had spent months deleting things. Messages, emails, drafts of letters he never intended me to read, Transactions disguised as reimbursements, promises disguised as jokes, insults buried inside emojis. I had seen them all. I had backed them all up, and I had time-stamped every one of them long before he thought he had anything to hide. It started innocently enough, months before the wedding, when he insisted on syncing his old phone to my laptop, just to make sure he didn't lose contacts. What he didn't realize was that a full image of his phone, including deleted data, had been quietly stored in my system ever since. I hadn't looked at it then. I wasn't suspicious. I was just organized, prepared. Or maybe I was just the kind of woman who never really believed she could let her guard down. Not fully. And when everything exploded at the altar, that old backup became my anchor. I spent the days after the honeymoon summit in silence, not because I was grieving, but because I was preparing. I went through those files like a forensic linguist. I flagged anything that referenced finances, property, other women, legal maneuverings, coercion, threats, veiled manipulation, third-party correspondences. I printed everything. I didn't email it to myself. I didn't store it in the cloud. I printed it, on thick, archival paper, in black ink that wouldn't fade with time. I organized it by category. I included context. I attached metadata. I bound it. And then I filed it. Not in a drawer, in court. You see, I wasn't after revenge anymore. I was after accountability, the kind that lives in law books and case files. I filed a civil case, not against him directly, but against his attempt to claim assets through deception. I used the messages as evidence of moral fraud, of premeditated manipulation, of intent to exploit inheritance through marriage under false pretenses. My lawyers smiled when they saw the evidence. One of them said, "This isn't a case. It's a novel with receipts." He found out about it when he was applying for a consultancy position with a public agency. They did a background check, saw the ongoing civil procedure, read the public records, called him in, asked him if he had any undisclosed legal entanglements. He said no. They showed him the case number. He said it was a misunderstanding. They handed him a printed message, his message, where he joked about marrying for money and divorcing after the estate clears. He never got the job. He never got another interview in that industry again. Meanwhile, I received a letter from the court requesting further documentation. I sent it by courier. The second binder, labeled Deleted To. The judge issued a protective order, not for me, but against him, barring him from initiating contact under any personal, legal, or financial guise. I had become not just his failed investment, but a threat to his freedom of movement. And I did it with words he thought he had erased. At night, I imagined him trying to explain it to friends, to his lawyer. I didn't mean it. It was a joke. She's twisting everything. But those excuses always come too late, don't they? After the signature, after the screenshots, after the printouts, after the notary stamp, after the legal seal. Regret isn't a defense, nor is charm, nor is panic. What's most poetic about it is this. For all the things he tried to erase, it was the deleted that destroyed him. Not the declarations, not the speeches, not the letters he crafted to look innocent. It was the messages he thought were private, the ones he sent in arrogance, thinking no one smart enough to read them would ever care. But I did. And I didn't just care. I categorized them, time-stamped them, and entered them into history. That's the thing about silence. It looks passive, but it isn't. Silence is preparation. Silence is collection. Silence is a vault that opens at the exact moment your opponent thinks you're gone. And when I opened mine, it wasn't for revenge. It was for the record. And the record? It's permanent. When you've been treated like a pawn long enough, you learn how to play like a queen. And I knew he wasn't done trying to profit from me. The ceremony may have ended in silence, and the papers may have been filed. But men like him don't walk away from a name they think they can still monetize. He had rehearsed it too long, rehearsed the speeches, the branding, the new connections. What he wanted from me was never just my inheritance. He wanted what the last name opened, the doors, the clubs, the investors, the legacy baked into stationery and whispered in boardrooms. He had memorized the script of becoming someone by borrowing me. And just because the wedding collapsed didn't mean he would stop the plan. Men like him never stop. They just pivot. But what he didn't know was that I had already studied his pivot long before he made it. I saw the email he sent to a former contact 2 weeks after the altar. The domain name was new, sleek, cold. A consulting firm, leveraging my surname, masked behind a joint legacy concept that spoke of heritage, trust, and generational vision. He was planning to open the company in Delaware, where the laws made it easy to bury bad intentions beneath good paperwork. The website was still in draft mode, but the sections were outlined. About us, the legacy team, visionaries of modern inheritance. There was even a press release drafted, titled, Reinventing Legacy, The Power of Partnerships Built on Trust. It wasn't hard to trace his steps. He reused passwords, repurposed templates, recycled contacts. But the most egregious mistake? He filed the LLC registration using a holding name tied to my family's estate, a name that technically was still in transition between inheritance and donation. He thought that gave him a loophole. But what it gave me was a legal window. I called my attorney. I had the holding name legally moved under a protective clause that prevented unauthorized corporate usage. Then I filed a separate entity under nearly the exact same name. Only this one had a different purpose. Nonprofit, educational, awareness-driven. And then I bought the domain. All of them, actually. Every variation. Every .com, .org, .us, .net he might have thought of. And I built a landing page with a single line. Legacy is not built on lies. I didn't have to say his name. I didn't have to write an expose. I didn't need to upload a single image. Those who knew, knew. And those who didn't, they would soon. He found out during a pitch. I had friends in the room. He was mid-sentence, talking about legacy initiatives and high-net philanthropy, when one of the investors opened the site on their phone and tilted the screen. The room went silent. One by one, the attendees pulled out their devices. Some smiled. Others didn't bother to hide their laughter. He tried to explain, said it was a glitch, that someone was trying to sabotage him. But the investors had already seen the court case I filed weeks earlier. The same messages I had printed and filed were now cited in a legal note attached to my nonprofit registration. They saw the timestamp. They saw the irony. He didn't just lose the room. He lost his leverage. His pitch deck was worthless. His name, now attached to mine in entirely the wrong way, became a cautionary tale on private mailing lists and at exclusive dinners where legacy still meant something. And that's the thing about legacy. It doesn't respond well to scandals. It doesn't forgive opportunists. It certainly doesn't fund them. The best part? He tried to sue for trademark interference. The judge laughed, because I had documented every single step, every file, every change, every web domain purchased in my name, through my account, under my counsel's guidance. It was airtight. The suit was dismissed before it began. He paid the fees. I filed for recovery of costs. He had tried to build a tower on quicksand, and I had taken the shovel away before he even poured the foundation. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to drag him through tabloids. I let the paper trail do it for me. And paper doesn't forget. While he tried to construct a facade of professionalism on borrowed identity, I was already living in a world where he no longer existed. Not legally, not financially, not professionally. He could print as many business cards as he wanted. They were just fiction now, because legacy isn't what you marry into. It's what you leave behind when you no longer need to prove yourself to anyone. And in the end, his name became an empty field on a rejected application, while mine was printed at the bottom of a certificate that read, Entity registered, trademark secured, purpose, truth. I never chased a spotlight. I never raised my voice in rooms that weren't mine. I was taught to observe first, speak last, and only sign my name to things that couldn't be erased. But some truths beg for paper. Some silences deserve ink. And there comes a moment when even the most private humiliation needs to be archived. Not for pity, not for attention, but to prevent repetition. That moment arrived on a Thursday morning, when a journalist from one of the most respected publications in the country sent me an email with a subject line I will never forget. Would you like to be the final page? She had heard whispers, not from me. I hadn't spoken publicly, hadn't written a tweet, hadn't made a scene. But the pieces were beginning to reach each other. A canceled wedding, a frozen trust fund, a corporate fraud filing, a foundation born out of fire. People who thought they were watching from a distance began to realize they were inside a story too large to ignore. The reporters said they were preparing a long-form feature about inheritance fraud, marital deception, and the growing trend of women weaponized as access points to old wealth. She didn't want a quote. She wanted context. And I gave it, carefully. I didn't mention his name. I didn't need to. She had already done the research. What I gave her was what only I could. The way the rooms felt. The quiet terror of discovering you were a project, not a partner. The fluorescent light over a signing table that suddenly felt like an interrogation lamp. The silence that follows betrayal when the betrayal is dressed in expensive fabric and smiling for guests. I told her what it meant to sit still while your identity was mapped and monetized by someone who claimed to love you. And I told her what it felt like to walk away, not with vengeance, but with documents, stamped, filed, and legally irreversible. She fact-checked everything. She requested files, which I sent through encrypted links. She asked for timelines, which I provided down to the hour. And when she sent me the final draft, she asked if I wanted to approve my quote. I told her to keep only one line. It wasn't from an interview. It was something I had written on a Post-it and stuck inside a drawer the night I first felt something was wrong. A note to myself, back when I still thought I was imagining things. It said, "He underestimated me because I smiled in silence. But silence was my armor." The article went live on a Sunday. Front page digital, syndicated in the Monday print. It was a masterclass. Not sensationalist, not vindictive, just truth, layered and patient and full of receipts. My section wasn't long. A half page near the end, titled simply, "The Bride Who Left a Legacy Instead." It described the ceremony that never happened, the document that replaced the vows, the exit that didn't require screaming. My face wasn't shown, just the back of the dress, just a veil mid-motion, caught by the wind. But he knew. And so did his new contacts, his prospective investors, his family who had once toasted to our engagement with flutes of stolen wine. The article didn't accuse him of anything. It merely stated facts, dates, signatures, contradictions. The reporters had uncovered even more than I expected, a pattern of failed engagements, questionable financial filings, overlapping timelines with other women. One paragraph described a nearly identical situation from 4 years prior. That woman hadn't had my resources, but now she had my phone number. He tried to suppress the article, sent a cease and desist, claimed defamation, contacted the publication's legal team. They responded with a link to the court records. Public, unsealed, undeniable. He threatened to go on camera. They invited him to. He didn't. In the days that followed, my inbox filled, not with gossip, not with pity, with stories. Stories from women who had almost walked down the same aisle I had. Women who had given up on reclaiming dignity because dignity to them seemed like a luxury only others could afford. I answered every message, not because I needed to, but because I remembered what it was like to feel alone and ashamed for being lied to while wearing white. There are moments in life when the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. No outburst, no rebuttal, just a well-placed paragraph in a paper read by millions. He spent months trying to rewrite my narrative. I gave him one, published, cited, and bound in archival ink. And I didn't need a microphone or a courtroom or a press tour, just a truth too sharp to stay quiet. And that truth now sits in a leather-bound anthology of the year's most important investigative reports, in libraries, in schools, in waiting rooms of law firms where women whisper their doubts before they're too late. He tried to erase me from the story. I became its footnote, its chapter, and, in the eyes of some, its warning. But more importantly, I became my own author, and I didn't need to raise my voice, just my pen. I never returned to the house we chose, or rather, the house I chose, and he plotted to claim. Its windows had always felt too large, its walls too thin for the kind of silence I had learned to cultivate. After the article broke, I received offers. Brands wanting to sponsor my story, publishers chasing memoir rights, lawyers asking if I'd join class actions. I declined all of them. I didn't want a brand. I wanted a boundary, permanent, legal, protective, for women like me, who once mistook proximity for love and manipulation for charm. So instead of selling my silence again, I turned my voice into structure, into a fund. The process was meticulous. I contacted my father's old advisor, the only one I ever trusted, and we sat in his dim, oak-lined office while I explained what I wanted. Not a vanity project, not a temporary shelter. A long-term, watertight fund that could do one thing: help women leave weddings before the damage was permanent. He listened in the way people do when they know they're being asked to help clean up a fire they didn't start. We created a trust. We named it First Step, Last Vow. It was registered as a nonprofit that offered emergency grants to women within 1 week of a called-off engagement. No questions asked. The funds weren't for legal battles. They were for hotel nights, plane tickets, security deposits, locks changed, dresses returned, exit plans executed. I liquidated what was left of the inheritance. What he thought would be his launch pad became a lifeboat for dozens of strangers. The launch event was private, but meaningful. A small gallery in the city hosted us for free. No press, just women. The walls displayed donated wedding gowns, one from each story that led to freedom instead of ceremony. At the center, behind glass, was mine, preserved not in bitterness, but in memory. Below it, a plaque, worn once, never regretted. When I stepped to the microphone, I saw their faces. Not just grief, recognition. The kind of face you make when someone articulates what you didn't know you were allowed to feel. I didn't tell the whole story. I told enough. I told them about the veil that moved before I did, about the judge who waited in silence as I handed him a document that erased the future he thought he owned. I told them about the house that would never be his, the car that drove away without him, the firm that rejected his handshake after reading my quiet paper trail. And then I told them what mattered more, that we were not victims. We were archivists. Of red flags, of mistakes we'd never make again. A woman approached me after the event. She didn't give her name, just pressed a handwritten note into my palm and said, "I left last night. Your article was the first thing I packed." Inside the note was a receipt, a deposit for a new apartment, paid using a grant from First Step, Last Vow. I stared at it longer than I should have. It was proof. Not that I'd won, but that I hadn't wasted a single drop of what I almost lost. News outlets eventually picked up the story, not mine, but the fund's. They published human interest features with headlines like, "The Bride Who Built a Bridge," and "From Wedding to Lifeline." None of them mentioned him. He had faded from public interest, retreated into silence after too many doors closed on him. I never said his name again. Not because I forgave him, because he didn't deserve to be the final word. I never remarried. People asked why. The truth is, I did, in my own way. I married myself to a future that couldn't be bought, to a name that didn't carry conditions, to a silence that no longer meant fear, just peace. And sometimes, when I walk past that gallery window and see my dress still hanging, still untouched, I remember how it felt to take everything they wanted from me and make it untouchable. My vengeance wasn't fire. It was architecture. My story wasn't an explosion. It was a foundation. And I built it with a pen, a clause, and a final walk down an aisle no one expected me to finish.